Welcome to the Office of Undergraduate Research Education Series. Today's presentation is on professional communication in research, and our speaker is Annika Deutsch. This is a virtual event and it's being recorded, so we ask you to mute yourself and turn off your camera to ensure the best experience. But if you have any questions, please use the chat feature, or you can unmute yourself when you're invited by the speaker. And this is the event evaluation. We would love everyone to fill that out after the presentation, but we want to remind our Europe and Wilk scholars that you must complete this evaluation in order to get credit for attending the event. And I wanted to share that the mission of the Office of Undergraduate Research is to facilitate and promote undergraduate student, faculty, collaborative research, and creative works in all disciplines throughout the U campus. And we would like to acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The U recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. It's Annika Deutsch. She's a liaison librarian for science and engineering at the Marriott Library.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you everyone for being here. We're going to dive right in. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what communication looks like today. There's a significant amount of work and coordination that must be done before research is ever published. Researchers communicate with each other, collaborators, funders, and publishers through emails, memos, internal reports, and other unpublished communications. And this type of communication influences your professional reputation and is often the first and sometimes the only way other researchers and professionals get to know you. Your reputation might be exclusively based on this kind of written communication that we're going to talk about today. So you might be wondering why a librarian is talking to you about professional communication. I have a master's in English literature, in addition to my Master of Science in Library and Information Science. And before becoming a librarian, I worked for 12 years in environmental consulting as a project manager and editor, among many other things. And I've had to learn how to communicate effectively with a variety of stakeholders, whether they're my colleagues, government officials, the members of the public, and I've seen a lot of good and bad communication. How we communicate with each other, even in a professional setting, might feel like it should be kind of obvious and inherent, but it really isn't. And it's also important to be aware of changing styles and norms. Writing does change, even if it's slowly, and so being aware of kind of the current state of writing norms is important. So our objectives today, this workshop is going to cover kind of best practices and general tips for professional interpersonal communication, the basics of creating professional emails, and creating Microsoft Word documents with a focus on accessibility and saving you time. And I want to be clear that there's no right way to communicate. You don't have to change everything about the way you write to be a successful communicator, but you should be making conscious decisions about your communication style, which means you need to be aware of the options that are available to you. And the good news is that this translates to any sort of written communication. So even if you don't stay in academia, if you're not going on to being a researcher, this will help you in the workforce. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. So we're going to dive right into best practices. It's going to depend on a lot of things. Thinking about the best way to communicate the information that you need to share. So you want to think about who your audience is. If you're, speaking to someone that you know, a peer on your level, maybe you can send a text message and be a little bit less informal, use emojis. But if you're speaking to your boss or you're speaking to the editor of a journal, you're going to be a little bit more formal, obviously. So thinking about who your audience is really important. Um, and knowing who your audience is important. You also want to think about the content. Again, if you're just confirming, what's the time of the meeting that we're having tomorrow, that can be communicated in a text message or an email. But if you are summarizing the results of a research project, obviously you're going to put that into a report in Word or similar software. And as I mentioned earlier, there are norms and styles within writing that might depend on the genre that you're writing in. And when I say genre, I'm not talking about like science fiction and fantasy. I'm talking about the format of what you're writing. So it might be an email as a genre, a technical memo as a genre, a report as a genre. And they're different norms depending on what genre you're writing in, but then there are also norms depending on the area of expertise or the department that you're in. Your institution might have specific style or norms that are used, or your organization, or if you're trying to get published in an academic journal, they're going to spell out some of that information for you. And you also want to think about the kind of abilities and limitations of the software that you're using. So, like I said, we're going to talk later about Microsoft Word. I know many students use Google Docs, but Google Docs is not quite as sophisticated as Microsoft Word. And so, which one really makes the most sense for what you're using? Um, you also want to think about for the actual written communication, make sure that you're using the spell check that's built into the software that you're using. When I say flow check here, I'm saying does it flow when you read it? And I really recommend that people read their writing out loud. If you are reading just with your eyes will skip over the typos and the double words that you accidentally included. So read it out loud to catch the little mistakes that you wouldn't otherwise catch, but it will also help you understand if it flows well. In general, in academia, we're kind of notorious for writing a lot, for being verbose, not always using, the simplest clear language, but in general, especially when it's that kind of unpublished interpersonal communication like emails or memos, try to keep it short, keep it well organized. Use subject headings to create section breaks. Um, if you can create a bullet list or a table instead of writing a paragraph of text, that's going to be better. Um, if you like to use AI to help you write, and that's something that you're allowed to do in the context of your writing, some classes are not going to allow that. Um, be particularly careful about what information you take from AI. AI it's kind of notorious for being wordy and generalizing, which are really good characteristics of professional communication. Um, Also a good idea to have somebody else read your work. Um, Using appropriate words. Um, the Office of Human Rights has a guide that you can look at that covers inclusive language. So again, styles and words change. Make sure that you're not using a word that might upset someone else. And an example that I like to use is man-made is something that we see a lot of, but is human-made going to get the point across without potentially being upsetting to a woman potentially. Um, you also want to be thoughtful about your file naming, and we could have a whole nother session on file management best practices. But if you're sending a file, attaching a file to an email or sharing it through Box or OneDrive, you want to make sure that the file is clearly named so that people know what they're looking at. And then you also want to make sure that what you're communicating is accessible to everyone who might find it. So thinking about, we'll talk a little bit about this more, but um, color choices for someone who might have limited vision or color blindness, and we'll look at some of the kind of specifics that you can do within Microsoft Word too. So these are kind of some of the overarching best practices, and I'm happy to answer questions about them at the end of the session too, or if you have some to add. So we're going to talk a little bit about accessibility. So one of the reasons that I really like Microsoft Word and other Microsoft products, which hopefully you all know that as University of Utah students, you have free access to Microsoft products through Microsoft 365. So if you're not already using it or you don't already have it on your computer, I recommend getting access to that. Microsoft products have a feature called Check Accessibility that will do all the checks, most of the checks for you, and let you know if you have any um, problems that might not be accessible for for someone who generally we kind of think of it as someone who might be using a screen reader. So someone who either can't see or has limited vision or is colorblind might be using something like that. Um, the goal is you want to make it easy for someone to listen to a page being read. Um, alt text is tied to that. So that alt text stands for alternative text. It's basically used by a screen reader if you have an image in your document. You can right click on that image and add alternative text that is descriptive of what it is so that someone who can't see the picture knows what it's a picture of. Um, Microsoft products also use styles, and we'll look at that in detail when we get into that Word document. Um, but that's a way of breaking up your text with headings that also have key um, components outlined. So what is a title? What is a heading one versus a heading two that a screen reader is going to be able to recognize? And you can also use those styles for people who are looking at the page and reading it with their eyes to kind of break it up visually for those people too. As I mentioned, colors are really important. So, significant portion of the population, particularly male population, is red-green colorblind. So you don't want to communicate information through a graph, for example, that's only clear if you can tell the difference between red and green. So thinking about the ways that you can impart information in different ways so that everybody can understand it in the same way is important. You also want to think about contrast. I think we've probably all seen documents where, someone highlighted the text yellow, but they also, felt like they needed to double emphasize it by changing the font color to red. And when you have red on yellow, the contrast between those two can make it hard for some people to see. So we like that kind of black on white that we're used to. Another element of accessibility is links and underlining information. So a screen reader, if you have a link in your text that starts, https:///www is going to read each of those letters and characters out. And so it's preferable to include a descriptive text that is linked to that URL rather than the URL itself. Um, and and for those of us again who are reading it with our eyes, if you underline a URL, it's clear to us that we're looking at a URL. Back in the day when we didn't have the internet and we didn't have to worry about URLs, book titles used to be underlined and now they're italicized. So thinking about the way that you're formatting your text to make it clear. If you're trying to add emphasis, use italics or bold instead of underlining. These are some of the things to kind of think about as you're communicating with other people. So we're going to talk a little bit about emails before we get into the Microsoft Word piece. Here are kind of my bullet points of things to be aware of. And when I say research on emails here, I'm saying do your research about who you are contacting. So this, maybe you are sending a query to a journal editor to see if they want, if they might be interested in your research project, rather than saying, dear, journal name editor. Look on the journal's webpage, find the editor's name, do some digging into who they are so that you can personalize the message to that person. This is also important to consider when you're applying for jobs and things like that. You don't want to say, dear hiring department. If you can find the name of the hiring manager, always, contact them directly, personalize the message if you can. Sometimes, we send emails, we're asking a question that we could have answered if we had done a little bit of digging before we reached out. So make sure that you that you have done that due diligence before contacting people, and instead just say, hey, I found on your website that you say you accept queries, in November and December of every year. Is that true? Would you take a look at this topic, etc.? So do that research first. That can also be helpful if the person that you're contacting has an ambiguous name and you're not sure if it's a Mr. or a Ms. Or a doctor. You might be able to determine that information with just a little bit of digging. And Google is your friend there generally. Just make sure you find the right person, in case it's a common name. You also want to be really clear in your emails and in your written communication in general. So, a clear subject line of what information you're either giving to someone or you're asking about. Um, you don't want it to be too fun, just clear and concise what that subject line should be. You also want who you're emailing it to be pretty obvious. Uh, you don't want to CC somebody who doesn't need this information, or, you might want to clarify why you're CCing someone, copying someone on the email, if it's not obvious to the person that is your main to line. And also think about if you are or are not aware of BCC, blind carbon copy, where you're sending the message to somebody else, but the other recipients don't know that they're getting it. Use that kind of sparingly as needed, or you could always forward the email instead. And you really want, in general, your writing to be kind of short and sweet. Again, break it up with bullet points. Use shorter paragraphs if you can break it up. No one wants to open up an email that's just a wall of a paragraph of text. Um, Make sure that you have, a kind of positive sign off, thanks, best, sincerely, and include a signature that has your name and your contact information. With email, presumably people are, especially if it's within the same organization, they're, going to be able to tell what your name is, but in general, it's more professional to make sure that you are signing off and saying who you are. And you want to use a professional tone. So I did say, if you're unsure if someone is a Mr. or a Ms. or a doctor, do that research to find that out. But we're also, as kind of a society, moving away from gendered prefixes. So you could also, instead of saying, dear Ms. Deutsch, you could say, dear Annika Deutsch. And then you don't have to worry about doing that research necessarily. And like I said, avoid other kind of problematic words, and thinking about the words that you're using and how others might kind of take them. In addition to kind of in general professional tone, it can be helpful to kind of take your cue from the person that you're writing to. So in general, if I am writing to someone that I don't know for the first time, I'll be extra professional, dear first and last name, comma, explain who I am and why I'm reaching out to them, and end, with a thank you so much for your assistance with this, something like that, and my full signature. If they write back in a less formal way, then I'm going to take my cue from there. Or if their name is William, I'm gonna address it originally to William. But if they sign their next message as Bill, then I'm gonna take my cue that that's how they would prefer for me to call them. So it can be helpful to kind of start extra professional and then get more informal depending on the person's response to you. I have on here reply all do's and don'ts, but really in general, just don't reply all. I would say it's a pretty big issue in the workplace with people replying all when they don't need to or they don't realize that they're doing it. If everybody on the email needs to have the information that you're sharing, then go for it. But otherwise, just reach out to the people that you need to. And I have meeting invites on here as well because I think in general, especially as we're kind of as a society, post-pandemic, relying on kind of more digital means of meeting with each other. Maybe we're coordinating with people across the country or across the globe, more than maybe we did in the past. Um, if you have a large project team or a large group of people that you're trying to meet with, it can be helpful to use something like a doodle poll to get everyone's availability rather than sending out a meeting invite and having half the people decline because you didn't know what their availability was. Once you do the doodle poll follow up with an actual invite, I often get meeting invites that are just an email with the date and time, and then I have to go and put in my calendar, and everybody else on the meeting is doing that too. So helpful to include the actual invite or send it as an actual invite. And of course, many of us are using Zoom, and if you've used Zoom to invite someone to a meeting, you've seen again the wall of text in that invite when really people only need the link and maybe the passcode. So you can feel free to delete all that extra information and just give people the information that they need. So that's kind of general overview of emails. Again, think if you have questions and you can ask at the end and we can cover any additional topics on emails. But we're going to move into Microsoft Word. So this is going to be kind of the bulk of our time today is looking at an example that I have in Word to see what you can do in the way of formatting, designing, and editing your written communication. And so again, this is for the kind of longer form writing that you might be doing, which would be a memo or a report or an article that you're trying to get published. Like I said, I think many students only utilize Google Docs and may not realize that you have free access, but you definitely do. And it will benefit you in the long run to become familiar with Word because many workplaces use it. I've never had to pay for it because I always get it through a job, so don't worry about the cost of it. Um, Google Docs are not quite as powerful as Word, and there's also the potential issue of Google using information in your Google Docs to train AI, which hopefully we all know that there is the possibility of an AI learning from a personal document and spitting that information back out when someone asks a question. I generally avoid Google Docs or Sheets for that matter, unless I have something that's really simple that I need to easily share with someone else. Microsoft Word files can be shared through your free Microsoft OneDrive or Box accounts, which hopefully you also know that you have access to through the U. Sharing of Word files through those means is not quite as streamlined as with Google products. So I would say that's the one kind of advantage of Google Docs, but there are enough disadvantages that I do recommend Microsoft Word, or at least becoming familiar with it if you haven't used it before. So I'm actually going to hop out of my PowerPoint and into this Word document. And I'm going to share this also through the OUR page. So you'll all be able to use this if you want to as kind of a starting place. As a note at the top, I'm just going to say in my header here where I have professional communication and research, when I've typed it here, the kind of contrast between the white background and the dark gray text is good. But when I come into the document here, it's pretty low contrast. That's an example of something that you might want to change. I could move it out of the header and put it just in the top of the text itself to make that easier to read. I will also say there are two different versions of Word, and then there's also Windows versions in addition to Apple products. I'm obviously hopefully you can tell I'm using a Windows machine, and I'm using the application version rather than the browser version of Word. The application version is always going to have more options for you than the browser. So I would highly recommend downloading that app for free through the UIT website. But things might look a little bit different if you're using a Mac. So up at the top, I have what's called the ribbon and a number of tabs where I can do things. And there's honestly so much you can do in Word. But we're just going to cover kind of some of the highlights today to help you all get started if you're not familiar with Word. So on the Home tab here, you can see I have these different styles, and I'm just using the default styles, but you can also create your own styles. If you're like, I don't particularly want my headings to be blue text, I want everything to be black, you can update the styles themselves so that when you open that document and create a new heading, it will always be black. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But here, if I click into this tidy Word documents, I can see over here on the styles that this is designated as a title. So it needs to come at the beginning of the document, again, for a screen reader to see that this is a title. And I know I'm talking a lot about screen readers, but it also is beneficial for people who aren't using screen readers because it's big font. It gives me that visual cue that this is the title of the document. This is an important thing to pay attention to. And in this document, the text that is included is kind of explanatory. So again, you'll have access to this Word file and you can come back to it and kind of be reminded of some of these tips and tricks. You can also create your own styles if you don't want to use the ones that are over here. One of the things that I think is really handy about Word that people don't necessarily know about, and Google Docs does do this as well, is you can create a table of contents. So I'm going to scroll down just so you can see. Here is a heading 1, here is a heading 2, which I can see, from over here, a screen reader would be able to tell the difference, but I'm also visually seeing a heading 1 has larger font and a heading 2 has smaller font size. But you can see I have broken up this text so that it's not just an overwhelming wall of text. In technical writing and editing, we talk about white space a lot, which is the space between the font that is white. If you're using kind of the general contrast of white background that we usually use. It can be really helpful visually to have a lot of white space so that your reader doesn't get overwhelmed with that text. So be kind of conscious of how you're using section breaks, subject headings, varying the length of the paragraphs. That will really ease the eyes of the people reading your communication. So you can see I have all these different section headings. So I'm going to go back up and I'm going to insert an automated table of contents. So if I go up to the references tab here, I can see there are 3 different automated tables of content, so I can pick whichever format I like. I can also do a custom version if I want to, but I'm just going to go with the first one it has here. It gives me the contents, and here again, this is because I've designated those headings as heading 1, heading 2 styles. Word is smart enough to create this table of contents for me so that I don't have to do it myself and then have things change and have to update the page numbers manually. If anything changes, I can just right click here, say update field, and I can either just update the page numbers or update the entire table. Super handy, especially if you get to the point of writing a thesis or dissertation that is very lengthy and things might get moved around. Highly recommend using the table of contents. You can also see down here, if I double click on what is my footer, I can edit it. And it pops up with a new tab in the ribbon called Design under Header and Footer Tools. And it also gives me some more automated options where I can put in a page number that it's just going to auto number them. I can also put in document information. So right now I have the file name in my footer, which is a really generally preferred option when thinking about file naming and organization. If somebody if somebody printed this out and handed it to someone next to them who took it down the street, they would be able to know what this document is. You can also do file path and other things like that. But good to have those headers and footers, and then I can just double click outside of that and move on. Let's see. All right. So getting into the content here, again, we talked about styles and headings. I can also make changes here. So I can come here and I say, I actually want this to be black instead of blue. I can change it that way. And then over here, I can say I want to update this style to match what I just changed here. And then if you watch right here where it has design, it will change to black. So now I've updated that style in this document. You can also create templates in Word where if you have a very specific vision or if you're working on a project where you know you're going to have a lot of memos and you don't want to recreate the styles every time, you can create a template that every time you click on it, it opens a new document that has all those styles saved in it, which can be handy. I definitely did that in my consulting days. Um, Another handy thing in Word is the navigation pane, and it doesn't always appear, but if you do Control F to start a find option, it will open up the navigation pane, and you can look at headings, look at pages, or look at results if you're actually searching within the document. But headings here is again giving me, based on the styles that I've assigned, um, a list of my contents, and then I can jump around to these sections. So if it wasn't clear before how I designated something as a style, um, I can clear this. So now it's just normal body text. And then I can, once I have it selected, I can click heading 2 here. And it shows up again in my navigation pane and in my table of contents. So super easy to set something as a certain style. Um, Another really handy part of Microsoft Word is the paragraph, what I like to call the paragraph pop-up. If I'm over here, I'm just going to highlight these 2 paragraphs here, and I'm going to come up to under the Home tab, there's this paragraph section, and there's this kind of drop-down option here. And this opens up more options I have for formatting each of my paragraphs. So I can indent either the whole paragraph or I can have a hanging indent. So that's how you would do if you were creating a works cited or a reference list where you were using a style that required a hanging indent. I can do a hanging indent this way for so the second line and on will be indented. Um, you can also adjust the spacing between lines. So if I wanted more white space, I could say after each paragraph is 16, and then it separates those paragraphs a little bit more for me. Another really handy option in here, if you click on the second tab over, is the line and page breaks. And you can kind of set information to stay with each other. So I can set this paragraph to keep with next, which means that if it came kind of at an awkward place on a page break, it would just skip to the next page and stay with the information that I wanted it to. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of information here and I can't cover it all in an hour, but play around with some of these options that you see. Some other really handy stuff is over here in the font section of the Home tab. You can change the case. So over here, if I've selected my change case here, I can come up here to where I have that capital A, lowercase a, and say, I want this to actually be in lowercase, and it will change all the letters to lowercase. Or I'm like, I actually want to go back to the way I had it. I could capitalize each word. Again, really handy when you're creating reference lists or citations where you have to change something to title case or sentence case, depending on the style that you're using. If you're using IEEE or ALA, APA, or MLA, really handy. You can also sort. So if I have these bullets here that I wanted to sort alphabetically, I could come up here under paragraph to this A to Z and sort it by paragraph, and then it's going to do that alphabetically. Um, you can also show or hide hidden characters with this kind of paragraph symbol up here. It's going to show me all the spaces, all the paragraph breaks. Sometimes you get something kind of wonky in your, especially if you're like copying from another source into this source. And you can't figure out why it's strange. If you turn that on, you might see something that's hidden that is affecting your formatting. So that's a handy one to be aware of, but I wouldn't leave it on unless you're really used to having it on. We already talked about the table of contents and the headers and footers. Another handy tool in Word is page and section breaks. So if I'm in In the layout tab over here, you can see there's a breaks option here. And if I just have a line break right here, I can come up here and either start a new page or I can start a new section. So if I wanted to just end it there, I could do that. Gives me a lot of extra white space that I really don't, that's too much white space. But I could also do a section break, which will look the same initially, except that it's gonna give me the same header that I had on my first page. And if I wanted to do a different format for my page numbers, if I wanted instead of it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, I wanted to have 1-1 and then 2-1, 2-2. That's how you would do it, is by having section breaks. And I'm also happy to answer questions if any of you are having trouble or want like specific information. You can always reach out to me and I'm always happy to help kind of troubleshoot some of these issues as well. As I said earlier, one of the best practices of writing in general is to break up the text visually and succinctly. And one of the best ways to do that is with bullet lists. So hopefully we all know that if we're here and we can come up here and turn that bullet list on or off. You also want to be aware of numbered lists, and that they should really only be used, these 1, 2, 3 lists when the order is important. So if you're writing a recipe, for example, or a standard operating procedure in your lab, and it's important that you do this step first and then this step, that's when you want to use a numbered list. But you don't really want to use a numbered list if that order isn't important. You would just use bullets instead. The last kind of thing with design is table and figures. You can add them. Tables in Word are not like the best thing. They can cause a lot of headaches. But sometimes you just got to include those tables. And you have those options within Word. I'm just going to show you a couple things with figures here. If I right click on this image here, I can change kind of how it aligns with the text on the page. Oftentimes we drop an image in and it just kind of moves all the text around, but you can adjust that here. And this is where the alt text comes in, so that alternative text. So I've already added this information, and sometimes images will actually be imported in Word with some text that you can edit, or you can leave it as is. So here it says 2 cats making a tail heart. So it's alt text should be pretty short, just very descriptive of what it is. You can ask it to generate a description for you as well. Or you can check the box saying mark as decorative. So then in that case, a screen reader would just skip over that image because it's not important for the reader to be aware of to understand the text. And then here we have a caption. And so if you're in the references tab, you can actually insert a caption. And the reason you want to do it through the references tab is, again, so that it will auto number them for you. So then if I had another figure that I moved above this one, I can just hit update and it will update the numbers for me rather than me having to do it manually. If you're writing a report that has 40 images in it, then this is a really important tool for you to use. And I can also set it if I had different section breaks to include the section number. So it would be figure 1-1 or figure 1, however I want to see it. So that's a handy one. The other option in this references tab that I think is important to know about is the footnotes. So a footnote is, a note that appears at the end of the page, and it will auto number those for you. You can also do an end note, which will create a list at the end of the document. For all of those. So if you're writing a book chapter, for example, you might have end notes instead of footnotes. But again, always use those automated features if you can. People are used to seeing them that way, and it saves you a lot of time. Okay, another option that you have, well, let's talk about editing next. In the review tab is where you'll find most of this information. So hopefully we're all familiar with the spelling and grammar or spell check options that you have in software like Word and Google Docs. I will say it's not always right. So don't just go ahead and accept every change that Word is telling you, because sometimes it's not quite smart enough to catch what you're trying to say. So for example, it's saying this should say allow, but if I look at it, the noun is singular, it's tab, but it's saying indents and spacing tab, but it's one tab. So I would actually ignore that and move on to the next issue, and it's complete. Um, the other handy thing that it will give you is this check accessibility that I mentioned earlier that you can do in PowerPoint and things like that as well. It will give you errors and then it'll tell you what the error is. So on that first page, it didn't like my little graphics, which I had marked as decorative. So I'm not worried about them not being in line because, again, a screen reader isn't. This is geared towards a screen reader and it's just not going to read them because they're decorative. And then it's also pointed out this issue that I had with the contrast between the background and the text itself. So I could go in and adjust that if I needed to. If I didn't have alt text on that figure, that photo of the cats, it would also have pointed that out to me. So that's handy. Track changes is huge, and I don't think that people use it enough. But if you are in the review tab here, you can turn track changes on, and that's what you're seeing down here, where I had track changes on and I made an edit to this text. So instead of it saying people either love or hate track changes, I would change it to people all love track changes. And this is really handy when you're giving feedback on somebody else's writing or they're giving feedback on yours. If you send a document to your boss or to a journal where you want to have something published and they sent you a revision without track changes, and you're not going to learn anything from the changes that they've made. So really important to have the track changes on so you can see. Some people kind of struggle to read a document when you have the track changes on. So it's also helpful to know that you can have track changes on but not look at it. So if I have it on and I come up here, I can say no markup. And then it just shows me the latest version, but without having to look at the red if I just want to edit it in that way. And then I can come back here and look at the track changes again if I'm at the stage where I want to address those changes. If you sent something for review to somebody and they sent you back a revision, but they didn't have the track changes on, there's also this compare version where I can say, in a folder, I have the original document and the document that they sent to me. It will create a track changes version. It won't tell you who made the changes. They'll all show up as the same editor, but that can be really handy. It's also really handy if you have like multiple people on your project making edits, and then you're going to send like one clean track changes form to somebody. You can get rid of who made the changes by doing it that way. And the last thing I'll talk about is comments. Again, in the review tab, I can add a comment here saying, rather than changing the text itself, I could say, I recommend that you make this change instead. Someone else can reply to my comment, and if they think that they've addressed it, they can hit resolve and then keep a record of the changes. So again, there's so much more that you can do with Word, but those are some of the things that in my experience, people don't necessarily know about or use in the best way. And so I wanted to kind of give you all a preview of what's available to you. And we got a few questions through registration already that I've added up here. If you have additional questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them once I've gotten through these ones. So someone asked, is it important to save or archive professional research related communications? Yes, absolutely. Another kind of best practice of email communication is if somebody emails you, reply to their email, and then you develop what's called an email chain rather than, somebody emails me and then I send them a separate email. not connected to that original one. If you have an email chain, then you can just save the last message and you have that whole communication there. For the documents, I am kind of a hoarder when it comes to file saving, and I'm going to save every version that has substantial changes, every version that has comments in it, and then how I address those comments. And again, like I said, we could have a whole nother session on file organization, but make sure that you organize the information and you've named the files in a way that you and other people can tell like which one is the latest version, what each document actually is without having to go into it to look at it. Um, what do you view as the most important part of professional communication? Um, be polite. That means different things to different people, but be friendly, um, be flexible. So, if I'm asking somebody to review a document for me, or like, hey, would you consider publishing this article? I'll say, let me know. Um, in the next couple weeks, or if you need more time, just let me know that. Um, Let me know if you have questions, if there's anything I can give you, let me know. I think those are all important parts of professional communication. And again, kind of taking your cue from the other person if you've heard from them or they're the first one to reach out to you. If they're being very formal, you should be formal as well. Um, Third question is, what are some simple strategies you use to make sure your communications are formal and understandable by the audience? As I said earlier, start with a greeting, personalize it if you can, present the information succinctly. So using bullets, maybe bolding key information so that it visually stands out for them, and make expectations really clear, but offer them options. So like I said, if I'm sending something to someone for their review and I say, hey, can you get it back to me in a week? If you need more time, just let me know in a week. And I'm happy to accommodate that. And then sign off again with something polite. And the last question here is, do you have any tips for organizing lab notes so that they can be shared and understood easily? I have a lot of experience with lab notes or field notes primarily in consulting. Use headers. So think about it in the same way you would think about something that you would write in Microsoft Word. Use really descriptive text. Don't assume that someone reading it knows all the background information that you have. Give that information to them. Date everything, include the page numbers on everything. Define acronyms. So again, don't assume that people know what an acronym is that you're using. Try your best to make your handwriting legible, and don't erase anything. I think this is probably something that would be defined in your lab procedures, or your project's data management plan. But in general, you wouldn't erase something, but you would cross it out with one line and then make a note of why you crossed it out, and what it should have said. Um, so those are the questions that we had in advance. Um, Shelley, do we have any other questions in the chat?
There's one in the chat. How can I listen to a screen reader to determine if my document is accessible and reads well?
Oh, good question. You don't actually need to listen to the screen reader if you're using that check accessibility feature in Microsoft Word or other Microsoft products. It will tell you if something is problematic, and then it will also give you information about how you can change it. So, like in Microsoft PowerPoint, where you might have, for example, text on one side and an image on the other side of the slide, it will tell you what the reading order is for a screen reader, and if you might want to rearrange. Like, does it make more sense for the image to be, for the alt text of the image to be read first, or the text, and then change it? So you don't actually need to listen to the screen reader if you're using that check accessibility feature. To know if it's going to be accessible. But good question.
We have one additional question from a registrant. How do you communicate professionally when there are strong disagreements?
Ah, and there are going to be, right? It's something that we need to be prepared for. Again, I would say being polite. I've kind of heard many people use kind of the sandwich metaphor of saying something positive and then something negative and then something positive. So kind of sandwiching the criticism or something that you disagree with in between positive things to kind of mitigate the negative qualities of the message. Um, and being just really clear about what you're trying to say and don't take it personally. It can be hard to get a confrontational message from someone potentially and not automatically reply back in the same tone. So this would be the instance where I'd say, don't take the cue from the tone that you're getting if it's very negative or confrontational. Take a pause after you've read it, come back to it, and kind of kill them with kindness, I would say, is the best option.
Well, thank you, Annika, for this very informative presentation. There was information in there I had no idea about. I just want to remind everyone about the evaluation form. I just put the link in the chat. The Europe and Wilk scholars must complete this in order to get credit for attending today. And I just want to remind everybody the Office of Undergraduate Research, we're located in the SEAL Center, which is just east of the Union. We're here Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Our website is our.utah.edu, and you can email us at our@utah.edu. So thank you again, Annika. We really appreciated this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.